Hi, I'm Sami, and this is the Career Kickstart Show. Today, this is going to be a little bit of a different episode because for the premiere of the third season, I thought it was finally time for you guys to listen to what I have to say. And thank goodness that somebody on LinkedIn suggested that to me so I didn't seem like completely self-absorbed, even if, this episode may make you think that I am. But with what is this, like the 71st episode? I thought, hey, let's do something different, shake it up. And to help me, I have brought friend of the show, Mariza Monteiro, who you might remember from past episodes about financial freedom, cryptocurrency, and just being a badass. Mariza is here today because she's an experienced podcaster to ask me a bunch of questions. So I'm actually kind of nervous because while I have done many episodes of my show, I haven't actually been on that many podcasts. So let's see how I do on the other side of the table. Now that I have rambled on, let's have I don't know, Mariza, you're kind of the host. You're doing the music.
I am the host.
Take this over. Like, what am I even doing?
Turn the table. Here we go. Super excited. Thanks for choosing me to do the guest hosting. Can we call it guest hosting? Guest hosting and interview you. We've known each other a while, but I'm actually super excited to ask you some more probing questions about the podcast, about career coaching, about career advice. And I know the answers to some of them. I'm sure we've discussed it along the way, but I take your coolness for granted. So I just want to actually get to those questions and go back over all of that stuff. So let's dive in. You usually, if I'm correct, start your show with a tell me about yourself or an elevator pitch. What is your elevator pitch?
Tables turned, which is terrible because my mind went suddenly blank and I practiced this. So, okay, here's a little bit about me. So I am an experienced career educator who has spent the last 5 years researching, teaching, and speaking on career development, branding, and LinkedIn. So I have worked with everyday professionals and Silicon Valley startups to really get them my insights into the job market, LinkedIn branding, and just working with driven tech professionals. My background is in library science, which, not everybody knows, which is why I can combine research and instruction with practical experience gained through organizing, career events, working with job seekers, and, just kind of doing my thing. Usually I don't end it with doing my thing, but I got so nervous. Oh my God, I've been putting people through this for 70 episodes.
You've been doing this to others. So yeah, definitely. That's a background that you've had. That was a good overview and a pitch. How does this podcast actually become a part of what you do professionally? Why did you choose to start a podcast to fit into your career and your coaching?
Okay, good question, because I am all about telling people to network and to get out there. But I am an introvert, and honestly, I don't like huge parties. I get that I know. I get a rumbly in my tumbly when I first walk into like a conference hall. I'm just like, ugh. What I like about a podcast is that it's kind of like, how they tell you to do like an informational interview with a professional. This is just me having a very like legitimized vehicle to ask people pretty much to do an informational interview, except it's a podcast and they get a copy of it. And it means that I've had the opportunity to like talk to people that like I'm not sure would actually have talked to me. Like I've had Kim Luna on my show. I have, had folks like Lisa Lewis, who is a popular career coach. And it's just been a good way for me to have a one-on-one conversation where I'm way more comfortable. I get to ask questions, so I get to listen, which is usually better for me when I meet somebody because I'm always like usually like ridiculously excited with some of these people. So I have to play it cool. And that goes way better when I'm just like, you tell me about you. And then you can't see my face or I'm like, oh my God, I'm talking to Kimber Luna. So I can be cool about it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's definitely, I've heard from a lot of people that podcasting is a good way to network and do those sorts of things. For those that are listening now, maybe some of them want to take that advice and think, I should start a podcast too. What would you say to them as advice? What do you wish you had known when you started your podcast?
Oh, what I wish I had known was that with a podcast, they're super fun in a lot of ways, but editing them, that takes forever. So if I was going to begin again, I probably would start on something like Anchor, because it's way easier to do. You can just record people and go. I mean, of course, now I have a stable of like really, pretty decently professional sounding podcast episodes, but it was difficult in the beginning because I loved recording them, but then when it came time to edit them, I was just like, ugh, now it feels like a chore. And for folks who are kind of on the fence about it, might as well see if you like doing it the easy way, if you fall in love with it, and then take the time to either invest in professional editing or bite the bullet and learn how to do it yourself.
Right. It was a very tedious part. People think they'll do it all on their own and then don't really end up realizing that it's the hours and hours that go into the post-production, just the fun part of the or talking to the world. Absolutely. So what can you tell people that they can expect from season 3? Is there any hints or insights or guests that you know that are coming up that you can tell people to look out for?
Yeah, for the 3rd season, I've already interviewed a really cool career coach that specializes in healthcare hiring. And that kind of with this season, I'm trying to make sure that I hit some places where I haven't really like gone before, like specific industries. I'm also bringing more people on for career stories who have done, some form of career change, because I know that's really important for folks. And I really want to do something with some of the old guests that I've had on. Like I've had on some really awesome folks, like of course you, and then I had on last season Sherry Cormier, who deals with resilience. And I'd love to do some panel episodes. So those kind of take time to arrange and to get everybody scheduled. So that's why the season hiatus between 2 and 3 was a little bit longer over the summer. But those are the things that are coming on up. So I don't know, I'm really excited about season 3. I feel like I do have a professional editor. I now feel like after 70 episodes, hopefully I've gotten pretty decent at this thing. And now I find that people are pitching my show, which is pretty cool. We've gotten a Top Career Podcast Award for the 2nd year in a row. Hopefully we can get a 3rd. Even if we don't, I'm still going to keep up last year's banner for as long as I can.
Keep it up. Well, that sounds like an exciting season to forward to. You mentioned some of your episodes include career stories. So how about we turn the table back again and talk about your career story? You told me several times before this, obviously, but also a few minutes ago that you started out in library science. Now help me understand how a librarian becomes a career coach.
Okay, one thing to know is that when I was a little girl, after I got over wanting to be a truck driver, because for some reason from the age of 5 to 10, I really wanted to be a truck driver. After I got over that, I wanted to be a librarian. And I was one of them precocious little kids who decided that at like 13 and then already kind of built a plan in place on how I would eventually become one. I already kind of like starting when in my undergrad, I was working at the Arizona State Museum. I started even before I graduated with my master's, I was working at a medical library and so on and so forth.
But Sami, why? I've met lots of kids, when I was a kid that wanted to be doctors and lawyers and all the common ones. What drew you to the librarian besides the bun and the cool glasses?
Yeah, and the sex appeal. Well, okay, so the thing that I always loved about it, and it took me a while working in libraries to discover what it was. Like, I thought it was just like, oh, I just really like books. But then I realized that I liked doing the research, I liked collecting the information, and I liked sharing it with people. I liked gathering, like I'm naturally curious, and I do love books and I love learning. And the funny thing about working in the library field and finally like where I ended up after grad school, I was a library coordinator at a tech college. So I was essentially running the library and everything. I realized that a lot of what I was doing was not what I liked the most. Because I had been on a university librarian track, so working in higher education. And I realized that a lot of that work has more like stuff to do with like citations and cataloging. And essentially, like in my case, I was pretty much the dean's bitch. And I realized the parts that I really liked was doing the workshops and not only that, but helping people with a very concrete thing that made a direct impact in their lives. And how I ended up in career services was that as this library coordinator, we were like an understaffed small college. So the library was not given as much of an importance, so I had a lot to do there, but then I was dragged into other departments depending on the need. And one thing that they really needed was somebody to help out the career services work with this internship program. So I started by being like,
there's the magic moment. There you go.
It is. And it was in like, a borrowed, business lady outfit that I got from my sister, because as a grad student, like you really don't have nice clothes. And then you graduate and you're all broke and you're like, oh God, I need a wardrobe. So yeah, so it's like that classic story of, being in the right place at the right time, but not realizing it. I had a really awesome mentor in the career services department, the director, who is this really awesome, Colombian woman who because this is a tech college where everybody's like a dude and everybody was like a veteran. Like it was not your typical college 18-year-old. Like I'm talking like dudes who are like 40 and they've like killed some dudes and they've gotten medals for it. Yeah, like so when people are like, why are you so calm doing public speaking? Well, my first job was with veterans. My second job was with homeless people and some people who are ex-cons. And then eventually I found cream puff, web developers. Like, that's why. So these guys were, not your typical. So I had to win them over to work with me. But I had a really good female mentor in this sort of place. And I did well enough with the internship program where I actually got, I raised like the rates of who was participating to like 30% of the school, which was really good because, it was hard to get everybody wrapped in. And I was able to do that in a month, get that many people just like interested and engaged and even just participating with career services. So I got a bit of a high off doing that. I know that sounds weird, but like when you directly help somebody, and a lot of these guys were first generation college students, some of them were Army, so they weren't like rolling in it. You get what I mean? So for some of these guys, I was able to help them find a job where they doubled their salary, and that doesn't just like one guy I helped, and he was a veteran. He was raising his own kids with his wife, but he was also raising some like nieces and nephews and stuff like that. Like he was supporting a large family. So him getting that income, that rose all the boats. And like, I was just like, I'm magical. Like, I know that sounds really egotistical, but it was one of those things where I was like, I have made like a concrete impact, which don't get me wrong, when I worked with university students, like, and stuff like that, helping them with their papers, I helped them. But it's real different from being like, man, they're going to be eating chicken all year long in this family because, like, I did a thing, like he did the work, but like I helped. So I really like that impact. Yeah, dude. Well, because
there isn't really there aren't very many more ways to significantly impact someone's life besides their livelihood and professional. I mean, yeah, you can introduce somebody to who they marry in the future. That's important, social and romantic. But one of the most important parts of our lives is what we do and how we are able to create a livelihood. And that's just a great story. I'd get a high off of that too.
yeah, man. Like, I felt like if Batman was like, instead of fighting crime, just like helping people like get money. So it was real great. And I realized that I was using all the skills that I like best that I learned in library school, like research, instruction, group facilitation, doing, this sort of like community building, promotion, a lot of the stuff that I liked best in library school. Like all the stuff that, like, there's a lot of stuff that I learned in library school that's useful, but I didn't like as much, like doing the citations or, like I was good at cataloging, but like, oh my God, like so boring.
But you've taken all of those great, analytical skills and research skills and turned it into something that's, a lot more valuable than just cataloging articles and books and those kinds of things, which is great.
Yeah.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, a couple of years ago when you started this path, I think it was also the same time you started the podcast when we met in Brazil. And I remember you doing the first couple of episodes, and here we are a couple of years later. And you've been doing excellent with converting those skills. What did it look like, between the experience that you had as a librarian and a nonprofit and developing, your career coaching tool set to actually setting out and becoming location dependent and doing your career coaching solo? Like, what was that transition like for you?
Okay. Yeah. And it was a twisty path because keep in mind, I was I moved into the career services department with that tech college. And then they went through crazy like budget cuts and closures. And that might as well be like my history in a lot of like educational institutions where I'm like the kiss of death or something, where they get like a budget cut immediately after they add me to the payroll. Like, I mean, even when I worked for like Radio Shack and they went out of business like 2 years later. Like, maybe that's why I need to be self-employed.
You're responsible for Radio Shack disappearing? Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
The truth comes out.
Yes, I'm taking responsibility for a lot of other people's actions in this episode, but yes, I did. So I was working there and I got burned out on higher ed in a lot of ways. And I wanted to do something new. I really liked seeing a practical application for my actions. You know what I mean? Like, I'm somebody where like cataloging was good, but it was a thing where unless I actually saw stacks of paper be moved down, like I felt very unfulfilled. I like, seeing a product to my work in a lot of ways. And I really wanted to kind of switch things up since I had been working with universities for so long, and I worked for a nonprofit, an AIDS foundation. The job was like not what I expected at all, but it was wonderful. It was beautiful. It's actually one of my 2 years there have produced some of the work that I am the most proud of, including I co-organized the first employment expo for transgender job seekers in the state of Arizona. I, worked with a grant that worked with at-risk youth, LGBTQ youth. I worked with homeless LGBT individuals and finding them employment and housing. Like, that was some meaningful shit that I did there. And I did a lot of stuff from like HIV testing, which you would be like, what? I could put that on my resume. You know, all the way to working with employers, educating them on LGBTQ sensitivity, doing like condom outreach. Like they were understaffed as nonprofits are.
Condom outreach just sounds like a funny way to say.
Yeah,
Are you throwing condoms at people? Is that what's going on?
I mean, you know, at the Pride Parade, yes. But no, they would send me to these rural communities in Arizona and just be like the one person, like, you know, at these health fairs talking about sex ed and stuff like that. I went to one for veterans in a very small town called Prescott. And that was me pretty much explaining lube to retired army men, and their like excited wives were like, "Ooh, I finally got him back. Ooh, I want this." And I'm like, "Whoa, damn." And of course, resume writing, which you would expect. But when you work for a nonprofit, you get one, you don't get paid a lot. Two, you get burnt out. Like, there was a lot of stuff that I was doing where I did get like on the job training as I went along, but like definitely outside of my pay grade, you know, having folks like, you know, like a whole family, you know, come to the place like after hours, not wearing shoes because they were fleeing in the night, like, you know, crazy stuff. And it was meaningful, it was wonderful, but I was burnt out and I was broke. And it was something where I'm like, I have a master's degree, I have a ton of experience, I've helped other people like get these amazing careers, and I'm doing this really meaningful work. But I am exhausted, and I'm living, you know, as a roommate with a really cool guy named Mario who fixes bikes in the kitchen as his side hustle, like in South Tucson, like with a pit bull, like,
I can picture it. I can picture it for sure.
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, as you have your clients and people that come to you looking for career advice, a lot of them were probably on a similar path to you, that they're just burned out and are in need of a change, you know, for whatever reason. Maybe it's money, or maybe it's challenge, or maybe it's, you know, bikes in a kitchen or pit bulls or whatever. Is that what you find, that people come to you, you know, for that reason as well? Is it common?
Yeah, well, and it's also because, like, for a lot of folks, especially if they're a high achiever, you know, it's not like they regret their choices, or I'm like or they're like, oh, like I'm a millennial, let me get my avocado toast. But it's like for a lot of people, they're like, okay, I have gone through the school, I've done this, I've done that, but I've been winging it. Like I'm not having the work life that I want. Maybe I'm at a point where it's just a natural time for me to move. Like there's a reason why even among, you know, the very lifelong social workers, they move to different challenges. Like, so they'll start working with maybe LGBT youth, and then they'll move to disabled people. They keep this stuff fresh because we are like at a time where most of us are very educated. We're in the most educated generation ever, you know, and having a challenge, having a new change of pace, that makes us feel better. But of course, there's a lot of folks where they don't have a choice. They're like, I thought there was an industry, but there's not an industry in my area. Like for library science, like at least in Arizona, you have to wait until a librarian dies. And then there's a new job because they're cushy, they have benefits, like you can work in a library like in an iron lung practically. Like they are that ADA accessible.
Right.
So for a lot to folks, they are coming.
Well, I think a lot of career paths are getting that way. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. I think a lot of what you mentioned, you know, not to be morbid, but a lot of not just the librarian or government, but a lot of career paths are becoming stagnant because the boomers aren't retiring or leaving or dying.
Yeah.
And it's suffocating the job market. So I bet there's a lot of people that come to like, I'm in this field, I can't find a job, I need a job. What do I do? Help me, Sami. Okay, I need a job.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And a lot of people are realizing that they weren't taught how to actually develop a career or a brand. And they don't realize, because we're given like last century's tactics, which did work if you were in that system where everything's offline, you all know each other in your town, like you're part of like, I don't know, the Elks Lodge, or you're volunteering at the church, so you have a network of people and you only need to send out like 5 resumes on Main Street because there is a Main Street. Like they act like you're just supposed to like go to the manager, look him in the eye, shake his hand. And that is what a lot of high school students and college kids are learning. At least they did when like I graduated. You know, I went to college in, you know, the height of the recession. So I was just like, oh, you know, what is it going to be like when I graduated? And I did better than a lot of my peers. I was able to get a library job within, you know, 3 to 4 months, even when I decided to switch into the nonprofit job, which I did, where I was able to negotiate a salary. I was being paid more than some of my peers. I also made sure to have a really good insurance plan. So I negotiated stuff. It was like I did well. But I had never really had much of a plan, even though I talk about being a precocious 13-year-old who wants to be a librarian trucker. My 5-year end plan ended with become a librarian, and then I don't know, it's like question marks and then death. Like I had really nothing after that. Which a lot of people, that's the thing, and that's why they're like, why am I just satisfied in this position, or why is this not, you know, what I want.
Well, I think the plan ends with get the job, right?
Yeah, we think that that's get the job, and then what? You'll stay there forever? No, that's not how the world works. Like with that nonprofit, I talk about being burnt out, but I only started preparing my business and feathering my nest when I realized that our grant was going to be up, and just due to the changes in the American administration and what they were approving with the national health grants, I knew that we were not going to be renewed. We were like a groovy like we were just not.
You saw the writing on the wall.
I did, and I'd already experienced budget cuts with the state museum, and then, you know, even Radio Shack. I managed to kill Radio Shack. You know, so and then with the tech college, they eventually closed as well. Like, I mean, like I saw the trail behind me and I was like, okay, all those other times I really believe the manager, who I have no doubt at that moment thought or wanted to or hoped to or had the best intention in the world in keeping me on. You know, because I'm a good employee. People like having me around. Like, I'm pleasant at the water cooler. I don't slow down production. I've never microwaved fish. I mean, I've been told I have an annoying laugh, but I'm not microwaved.
I don't think that's true. You're pleasant and helpful. Not enough employees are.
Thank you. So, like, people wanted to keep me around, but best intentions is not going to keep you on a payroll. So I already realized, okay, I don't want to deal with the heartbreak and the financial insecurity when this grant ended, because we were like a groovy inner city, like drop-in center for like down on their luck, you know, trans people, like, you know, serving lunch and serving self-care and like pretty much, and like we had like immigrants and everybody who came here, like we were pretty much like Donald Trump's, like if Mike Pence imagined like what he wants least in the world, it would be our groovy multicultural queer drop-in center. Like that would be it, where we talked about feelings all the time and try to serve healthy meals and blah blah blah. And I knew that was going to be gone. And that was before Christmas. I really had been like, okay, I'm looking at the end of this thing. I also know that I'm burnt out.
Before Christmas 2016, right?
It was, Christmas 2016, because I started my first day that I officially started my business was January 1st, 2017. So it was around that time. I had already been working a very small very, very part-time, 5 hours a week, which is BS. But that's what I was doing at the time, extra side hustle at a tech boot camp because I had started out with a tech college, so that's what I knew. And I was like, okay, I'm working full-time plus even more because with a nonprofit, like, yeah, you have a salary, but if they need stuff, they need stuff. I had a manager who was pretty good about that, but like, you know, shit happens. If a kid comes in after being beaten up at a bus stop, you're not like, sorry, kid, I'm off the clock. Deal with your injuries. So I'm looking at that. I'm also doing this job, and I know that it's all going to end, you know, and then I'll be kind of back where I was, you know, having to make something work in Tucson, which is a lovely place, but it's not the most economically thriving, you know, not at all. So I had to make a decision, and a thing that really did help along the way was that through working at this nonprofit, we had I learned a lot about, this sounds twee, but feelings, which because I was raised by very delightful like country people, and like feelings were not part of like what we really talked about. But I learned stuff like about cognitive behavioral therapy and positive thinking and things like that that really got me. And I also got training in motivational interviewing and mental health first aid and learning how to do like coaching and stuff like that because they always needed backup help for these, you know, support groups and other stuff like that. So I didn't
Well, you're a confidence builder, and I guess that's where it came from in your journey.
Yeah.
Having that as part of your job requirement, like these people are traumatized, you know, these people are homeless, probably for a reason because of trauma or, you know, whatever it might be, like you've got to be able to build their confidence. And I've seen you work with me and work with other people of that's where it is, building their confidence.
But yeah, no, and the thing is with that is that not only did I learn how to do that stuff for them, I was also doing stuff in some of those groups because in the beginning it wasn't like I was a facilitator. I had career groups that I facilitated. But keep in mind, like I was floating around a couple of grants, but the grant that I spent the most time with, we have done studies, and I didn't see them all at the time, but as we progressed, we discovered that 20%, that 90% of our people had trauma. 20% had mental illnesses so severe that they were having active hallucinations then. And I would be working, that's why my workshops, if you ever get to see an in-person one, are pretty entertaining because I've had to compete
with hallucinations.
You know, and also people who are court ordered to be there, so they don't want to be there, you know, and stuff like that. So, but they needed support with the actual mental health professionals just to be like babysitter backup, and everything like that. But I would sit in on some of these groups, and it was encouraged for us to kind of sit with our clients. We had lunches, so we would eat with them and stuff like that and be on like a peer support level. So I'd be doing some of these activities, and I found this stuff really helpful. And I mention that because having, I guess, a positive mindset or trying to reprogram your brain, I call it like, you know, throwing your brain back into the wash. That became really helpful when I started my business. And I just mentioned that because that felt like, for me, one of the key things that I don't think people talk about when you are starting a business or doing a career change is that the beginning for that sucks. Like, half the reason why I, do career coaching is that I want to economically empower people. And I feel like everybody should have somebody where they can go to talk about not just like, what's the strategy of doing this, but somebody to vent to, because, you want to put on a happy face for your friends, you want to like, maybe you have to impress your family, but it's a process that sucks. So when you can have mental wellness, it really does help. So keep in mind when we're coming to January 1st, 2017, I had done a year's worth of trying to freelance and do random things, and eventually—
What kind of freelancing?
Oh God, threw everything at the wall. In addition to Career Foundry, which is the career coaching, I also made flyers for parties, a little bit of freelance writing, freelance web design. I also babysat. Like, when you work for a nonprofit and you're giving your all to the community, it does not mean that the community pays you to supplement
No,
that
not
emotional
at all.
labor. So I was doing a bunch of random things.
Keeping your ears open for what people needed. Oh, you need a website? I can do that. Oh, you need
Exactly.
some flyers? How about me?
Yeah, and like with library school, I'd already learned stuff about social media tools, and I had been a kid where like I first sold my first website when I was like 16, because I was like that nerd who rode their bike to the library to play on the computer because we didn't have one at home, and I built little websites. Like I remember the first HTML fondly. So I was coming into starting this career coaching business with my mindset kind of dialed in some ways, where I already had some like self-care tools, and in my mental health toolkit I had some social media tools, and I have a pressing motivation of knowing that I could be unemployed by the next grant cycle, just because we wouldn't be funded. So I think sometimes when people talk about their business journeys, they leave out things. They're like, and then in 6 months, I was a 6-figure coach. And it's like, no, it took a while, but in 2 years, I'm a middle-class coach who's able to support herself and travel the world. Reasonable goals for reasonable people.
So that's part 1 from Sami Gardner. Do you want to hear more about her experience and how she travels the world and helps people enhance their careers? Stay tuned next week for part 2.
Change your career, change your life at CareerKickstartAcademy.com.